The room was silent, yet it pulsed with the weight of thousands of invisible voices. Taylor sat in the dim light, the curtains drawn, her phone turned face down on the table, as if the screen itself had become an enemy. The echoes of cheers and applause, the laughter and the headlines, the whispers in conference rooms where men in tailored suits dissected her choices, all pressed down on her. She had climbed to the top, higher than most would ever dare to dream. Yet tonight she felt suspended over an abyss, haunted by the memory of one decision that changed everything. A decision that looked golden at first sight, but carried shadows that would never leave her. She remembered the first time she walked into that boardroom. The air smelled like expensive wood and the quiet arrogance of men who believed they could shape destinies with contracts. They looked at her like she was a fragile spark bright, but brief someone they could control, shape, own. At 20, she was already a star, but not yet a force. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to bend their world. But the truth was simpler. She was cornered. The choice lay before her like a blade with two edges. On one side, security, structure, the promise of promotion, radio play, endless marketing, and the illusion of protection. On the other side, risk, rebellion, the unknown. And in that moment, she signed. She handed over her masters, her very soul etched into melodies and lyrics, in exchange for the dream of becoming more than just a fleeting sound on the radio. It was a decision carved into her heart with ink, binding her not just to a label, but to a future she could not yet see. For years, that choice fed her ascent. Every stage burned brighter, every award piled higher, every scream from the crowd echoed louder. From the outside, it looked like invincibility. The girl who wrote songs in her bedroom had become an empire. But empires are fragile things, built on foundations that can shift without warning. She could feel it. The ownership of her art was never fully hers. With every album, every tour, she carried a hidden wound, the knowledge that her legacy belonged to someone else. The night the news broke, she was sitting alone, scrolling through headlines that spelled betrayal in letters as sharp as knives. Her catalog, her past, her voice, her blood sold to someone who had mocked her, belittled her, cornered her publicly. It wasn't just business. It was personal. The world gasped. Some called it strategy. Others called it war. But for her, it was something darker. It was the moment when the past rose up to strangle her, reminding her of that young girl who once signed a paper thinking it was just a step toward freedom. Her mind returned again and again to that moment. If she had refused, would she have vanished into obscurity? Would the world have ever known her name? Or had she traded too much for glory that now tasted like ash? The silence in the room deepened as memories unfolded. She saw herself on stage at 19, clutching a guitar, eyes wide, believing every note was hers to command. She saw herself a decade later, staring into cameras, explaining with calm fury why she would re-record every song, why she would take back what was stolen. The decision that once chained her had now forced her hand into another, a war not of violence, but of resilience. But wars have costs, and even victories carve scars. She remembered the endless hours in the studio, reliving the very moments she once thought were sealed forever. Every lyric pulled from old journals, every melody a ghost of a younger self. It was not just recreation, it was resurrection. She was building a parallel universe, one where she was finally in control. The world called it brilliance. They called it revenge. But for her, it was survival. Because behind the glittering headlines, the triumphs, and the records broken, there was a darker truth. She had been forced to become ruthless, not by choice, but by betrayal. And in that transformation, something innocent was lost. She could never again write with the same naive belief that the world would protect her. Every word now carried weight. Every release carried strategy. Every smile masked calculation. The decision had made her a legend, and it had made her a prisoner. She thought of the fans, their voices rising like waves, chanting her lyrics as if they belonged to them. In truth, they did. The songs had become part of millions of lives, woven into heartbreaks, weddings, childhood bedrooms, and late-night drives. And yet, behind that universal ownership, she carried the burden of knowing that her original creation had been taken, bought, and sold like a commodity. Was this the cost of greatness? She could still feel the fury from that night when she stood in front of her team, hands trembling but voice steady, declaring that she would not surrender, that she would rebuild from ashes, reclaim from shadows, and show the world what it meant to fight for something invisible but vital: agency. In that moment, she had chosen the harder path, the darker one, to rewrite her own history while carrying the weight of betrayal on her back. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about power, identity, the terrifying realization that no matter how high you rise, someone can still pull the ground from under you. She remembered the faces of those executives, smug, confident, certain that she would bow. She didn't. And the cost of defiance was sleepless nights, exhaustion, the constant hum of pressure. The decision to re-record wasn't glamorous, it was grueling. Yet every track was another brick in a fortress she swore she would finish. But as she sat in that dim room, years later, she asked herself the question that haunted her more than any headline or interview. 1. Yes, she had reclaimed her catalog. Yes, she had proven her strength. But in the process, she had burned away illusions. Trust was gone. Innocence gone. The simple joy of writing a song without thinking about contracts, ownership, or betrayal gone. What remained was power, respect, control. But these were cold comforts when measured against the weight of lost belief. The crowd saw the victory. She lived the price. Every choice has a cost. And this first signature, that initial decision, was both the spark that lit her rise and the chain that bound her for years. Now, when the lights go down and the crowds disappear, she is left with silence. A silence filled not with peace, but with ghosts. The ghost of a young girl who believed the world would be kind. The ghost of songs taken and sold. The ghost of choices that could never be undone. Her empire stood tall. Her name echoed across continents. But deep inside, she carried the knowledge that greatness is not free. That to be powerful in a world built to silence you, you must sacrifice pieces of yourself you can never get back. And so she sat, staring into the dark, her hands still trembling, her voice steady but low, as she whispered to herself, was it worth it? The question had no answer, only echoes. Because the truth was brutal, the very decision that gave her the world also stole it from her. And that is the weight she would carry forever. The silence did not end. It never really did. Even when she was on stage, lights blinding her eyes, the roar of tens of thousands shaking the ground beneath her, there was a corner of her mind where silence lived, waiting. It was the silence that reminded her of contracts signed too young, of battles fought too late, of voices raised against her, not because she was wrong, but because she dared to be unwound. And no matter how high the sound of applause rose, that silence followed, like a shadow pressed against her skin. The weight of the decision lived in her body. She carried it in her shoulders, her breath, the way she looked at every room now with suspicion. Success had not erased the betrayal, it had carved it deeper. Every award ceremony where she smiled, every interview where she measured her words, every headline declaring her the victor, all of it was coated in the taste of iron, sharp and bitter. She had won, yes, but winning had made her harder, colder, less forgiving. Sometimes, in the rare moments when she allowed herself to sit by the piano alone, in a room with no cameras, no executives, no audience, she felt fragments of who she had once been. The girl who wrote because she needed to. Because it was survival, in a different way survival from loneliness, heartbreak, invisibility. That girl still lived inside her, but muffled, as if trapped behind glass. To let her speak freely again would mean forgetting the machinery, forgetting the war. But forgetting was impossible. The scars wouldn't let her. There were nights when she thought about walking away, leaving the empire behind, vanishing into anonymity, giving up the fight for ownership and letting the vultures feast. To just be human again, to not be a symbol of resistance or resilience. But every time the thought grew tempting, she remembered the young artists watching her, the ones who would one day face the same contracts, the same hands reaching out to take what they built. Her fight wasn't just hers anymore. She had become a shield, and shields cannot abandon the battlefield. And so she endured. She re-recorded. She reclaimed. She smiled through the exhaustion and let the world call it a comeback, when in truth it was something far darker, a resurrection born from betrayal. But ascension, even when hard won, is lonely. The higher she rose, the fewer people could understand the weight of her existence. Friends faded, relationships cracked under the pressure. Trust became fragile as glass. She learned to read motives behind every handshake, every compliment, every invitation. Was it friendship? Or was it leverage? In this world, nothing came without strings. The world adored her, but adoration is not intimacy. Crowds worshipped her, but worship is not love. She lived in paradox, surrounded by millions, yet profoundly alone. And when the silence returned at night, she realized the cruelest truth of all, that the empire she had built, the control she had fought for, came at the price of never again knowing the simplicity of being unseen. She remembered the day the first re-recorded album dropped. The world exploded with praise. Fans celebrated, the industry marveled. It was a triumph, the kind of victory that becomes legend. But she knew the truth behind the curtain. That triumph was born from sleepless nights, from whispered doubts, from the bone-deep exhaustion of fighting a system designed to outlast her. The smile on her face in the photographs was real enough, but it was painted over cracks that would never fully heal, because every win reminded her of the original loss. And some losses cannot be undone. As the years passed, she carried both crowns and chains. She proved that no one could silence her, that no betrayal could end her. But even as she rose higher, she felt the erosion of something softer. The decision had forged her into iron. But iron does not bend, does not breathe the way flesh once did. She had become unbreakable, and in becoming unbreakable, she had lost pieces of what made her human. She thought of the girl she had been, pen in hand, heart on fire, scribbling verses that no one might ever hear. That girl believed in magic, in possibility, in kindness. Now, years later, she believed in contracts, in strategy, in survival. Magic had been replaced with caution, possibility with calculation, kindness with suspicion. This is what a decision, as it reshapes not just your future, but your very being. And yet, she could not regret it fully, because without that decision, she might never have risen high enough to even face betrayal. Without that naive signature, there would be no empire to reclaim. The paradox was merciless. She owed her triumphs to the very chain that almost destroyed her. And so she carried both gratitude and bitterness, braided together into a weight she would never set down. When she stood on stage during her record-breaking tour, looking out over oceans of faces, she understood the contradiction more than ever. Every lyric she sang belonged to her again, rebuilt with blood and determination. The crowd's voices rose with hers, uniting in something unshakable. To them, it was joy, liberation, triumph. To her, it was all of that and also grief, because she knew what it had cost to arrive at this moment, and she knew the price could never be repaid. The history of a choice cannot be erased. It can only be rewritten, retold, reframed. She had rewritten hers in sound and fury, but the scar remained beneath every note. As the final song ended and the stadium lights dimmed, the roar fading into silence, she often lingered a moment longer on stage, staring out at the emptiness that replaced the sea of faces. In that emptiness, the truth always returned. She had won, yes, but the victory had carved her hollow. What is success when it demands the sacrifice of innocence? What is power when it comes hand in hand with isolation? What is ownership when it arrives only after betrayal? The crowd would never hear these questions. They were not part of the performance. They were the private whispers she carried into hotel rooms, into midnight reflections, into the silence that never left her. The empire stood. The legend lived. The decision had given her the world, and had stolen from her the very peace to enjoy it. Years from now, when the stages are quieter, when the headlines fade and the cameras turn away, she knows the silence will remain. And in that silence, she will still hear the echo of the pen scratching across paper, the first contract signed, the moment that set everything in motion. A young girl's hope turned into a woman's burden. A single choice that was both the spark of her rise and the root of her scars. Some people call it destiny. She calls it consequence. Because there are no victories without losses, no crowns without wounds, no legends without ghosts. And as she sits in that room once more, the curtains drawn, the phone face down, the silence pressing against her like an old friend, she allows herself one bitter smile. The empire is hers. The songs are hers. The name is untouchable. But deep inside, she knows the truth. Nothing is ever truly free. And she whispers into the dark, almost too soft to hear, the only confession that matters. I won. But it cost me everything.